Germain tried to change the king's mind, but the king was adamant. And if Carleton is in, Germain is out, and Germain knew it. And he offered to resign if the king would advance or promote him to a peerage that would allow him to sit in the House of Lords. And the king made him a viscount, and he took the name Sackville again. But Parliament didn't want him. The House of Lords tried everything to keep him out, but he finally went in to take a seat, to boos and catcalls and things thrown at him, and probably language that was rarely heard above deck. But he was very thick-skinned. He took his seat. He didn't do much in Parliament, but he took his seat. Now the Tories lost the government in March of 1782. And who is the Prime Minister? Rockingham. Remember, he had repealed the Stamp Act. The king still had it in for him and would not meet with him. And he couldn't install a cabinet without meeting with the king. So they had to have a go-between. And the go-between was the Earl of Shelburne. And so he went between Parliament and the Prime Minister and the King. Well, Shelburne and Rockingham were agreed. Now, England is the loser in this war, and they're going to have to deal with Spain and Holland and France. But before they did, they thought it would be a good idea to see what the colonists wanted. And so they decided to send a representative that they really trusted to France, where the American delegation was headed by Benjamin Franklin. Well, there was a problem because a flu epidemic hit London, and Rockingham died, and it made Shelburne Prime Minister, and he was determined to continue on what they had decided, and he sent Richard Oswald to Paris. Now, at that time, the only members of the American delegation were Franklin and John Jay. Now, Franklin didn't want to meet with them because he felt that the French should be involved. After all, Congress had authorized France to negotiate at the peace treaty for the colonists. I don't understand why they did that, but perhaps the communication was too lengthy. But anyway, Jay and Oswald convinced Franklin that, well, we're just going to talk. And nothing official, we're just going to talk. And of course, Franklin made it very clear that England was no longer dealing with colonists. They will deal with the United States of America, and the colonists will no longer belong to the British Empire. Well, Shelburne was not surprised, and he said fine, and sent Oswald back again. Now this time, when Oswald went back, Franklin was not there because he had gout and was confined to his home, and Oswald and Jay met. Now, if you look at the map that's in your packet, Jay and Oswald had a very frank discussion. Now, Oswald pointed out, and you can see where the original colonies are, and that their western boundary was the demarcation line. And beyond that, there was some Indian activity. And Oswald pointed out that Spain and France would insist that the colonists be confined by the demarcation line. And Jay said, if that line lasts, there will be no talks. The western boundary of the United States will be the Mississippi River. Now, if you look at that map, you see where that great white expanse that says Quebec, that's part of Canada. It belongs to the British Empire. And Oswald goes back to Shelburne. Is he going to give away a chunk of Canada? Of course he is, because if the French, and both France and Spain will want that territory, if France gets it, and then they've got the Louisiana on the other side, they'll have a solid corridor from the Gulf across the Great Lakes clear into Canada, which is French Canada. And Shelburne figures they'd rather have the Americans there than the French, and so he folded. Now finally, Franklin came back and John Adams arrived for the next discussion. And Franklin now is ready to talk business because his mail is being opened, his papers are being read, there are spies on his staff, and you know, he wines and dines a lot of ladies and he doesn't know which of them might be a French spy. So from there on, all of the negotiations were done word of mouth, nothing was written down. And they discussed finance. Colonies owed some money, they agreed to pay it. And John Adams wanted fishing rights off the Grand Banks, which off Newfoundland, and he got it. And they talked about the boundary lines, the St. Croix between Maine and Nova Scotia, which is now New Brunswick. That area is now New Brunswick. And then what were they going to do west of Lake Superior? You know, it was years and years before that boundary was set. But all of these things were discussed, thrown together, because Parliament was in recess. And when it is, the Prime Minister has the right to act for the Parliament and for the British government. And Shelburne intended to do it before the Parliament reconvened. He knew they would not accept the colonies leaving the British Empire. He knew that they were not going to accept him giving away a chunk of Canada. But he had to sign the agreement, and he did. He signed it, and the Americans signed it in alphabetical order: Adams, Franklin, Jay, and Henry Lawrence, who had gotten to there at the end. And it was, as far as Shelburne was concerned, it was settled. And they could go on now with treaty talks with France and other countries, because he knew exactly what was happening. Now, time was running out. Parliament reconvened, and the king read the Articles of Agreement, and Parliament went ballistic. And nothing got done. It was just wrangling and name-calling for days. But Christmas was coming on, so they went in recess again. Now, during that Christmas recess, Shelburne signed a peace treaty with France, Spain, and Holland. And when Parliament came back after Christmas, England was at peace for the first time in generations. Shelburne thought it might save his government. And so after they wrangled for a couple of months, Parliament decided and announced that they would have combine and have a coalition government, and Lord North would represent the Tories, and Charles Fox would represent the Whigs. Both of them now unacceptable to the king. He always hated Fox, and he thought that Lord North had betrayed him. He tried to defend Shelburne, but it was too late. Shelburne lost the election, and this new coalition government took over in early in the middle of January or so. And their platform was, we will repeal the Articles of Agreement, we will start over, the colonists will not leave the British Empire, and we'll all get back to the way things the king wanted, way the king wanted things. Well, they worked for 6 months to try to break that treaty, or that agreement, and they could not. Shelburne was a bright and very brilliant politician, and it was ironclad when he signed that the agreement. He had committed the British Empire. Now, the peace treaty was not signed until September, almost 2 years after Yorktown. Why is that delay so important? Because hostilities didn't stop with Yorktown. We often think Yorktown ended the war. No, it didn't. Hostilities went on for months and months and months. John Lawrence was killed. Bloody Bill Cunningham was massacred in South Carolina. David Fanning in North Carolina. Waters in Georgia. And the peace treaty was signed in September, and while it was being signed, and that group was together, Elijah Clark and Andrew Pickens were in the western part of Georgia, putting down Waters, his militia, and his disaffected Indians who were killing settlers in western Georgia. It should have been taken care of the treaty should have been taken care of long before that. And so the Queen was right. Parliament and the King lacked the statesmanship to know the manner and time of yielding what it is impossible to keep. But I'd like to finish with a quote from Benjamin Franklin. And he wrote to a friend, "We are all friends with England and all mankind. May we never see another war, for in my opinion, there never was a good war or a bad peace." Benjamin Franklin was a wise man too. Thank you.
Okay, I guess it would.
Anyone have questions for Chris? Questions about the British?
Chris, that was fantastic.
I
have one call.
Great, that was it.
Does anyone have a question?
I think somebody behind me.
Everybody's hungry, that's why.
Okay, join around Chris. Join around Chris, those that have been working with her over the years.
Elwood wants to. Steve?
And for those that are wondering if she's ever said to you, if not you, who, that's your clue that you belong up here.
Okay, now when?